Tensions threaten to boil over in the Palestinian territories after the death of a minister. The Palestinian Authority is under pressure to put an end to the security partnership with Israel. Is that even possible? And what will be the consequences of scrapping it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Thousands of Palestinians have held a funeral for Ziad Abu Ain, a minister who died during a confrontation with the Israeli army at a peaceful protest on Wednesday. It's the first time a Palestinian minister has died as a result of clashes with the Israeli military. Abu Ain was protesting the expansion of an Israeli settlement in the northern West Bank. Palestinian and Israeli doctors have issued conflicting accounts of how he died following an autopsy. A Palestinian doctor says Abu Ain died as a result of a blow to his body. The Palestinians say tear gas and a delay in getting medical treatment may have also contributed to his death. But Israeli officials say he had a pre-existing heart condition and his death was caused by a blocked coronary artery. Now, the Palestinian Authority has threatened to pull out of the security cooperation agreement with Israel because of this incident. The Security Cooperation Pact is deeply unpopular among many Palestinians, but one that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas previously described as sacred. It's a policy that arose out of the Oslo Accords in 1993. It requires Palestinian and Israeli security forces to coordinate with each other in the occupied territories. Critics say, in practice, Palestinian security forces help enforce the occupation on Israel's behalf. It allows, for example, the Israeli army to conduct raids and arrests in the West Bank without obstruction. A Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has accused Israeli soldiers of killing his minister, describing it as a barbaric act.
What happened today is a real crime. We cannot stand with patience or be silent about it. Therefore, the leadership is meeting now to decide. I honestly say that all options are on the table.
Let's get the thoughts now of our guests. Joining us from Tel Aviv, Akiva Elder, senior columnist with El Monitor. And in Washington, we have Matthew Duss, president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. Let me start with you. Good to have you both with us. Let me start with you, Matthew Duss. Is this just rhetoric from the Palestinian leadership when they threaten to end this security relationship?
Well, my immediate response is probably not. I think they can severely downgrade and slow the tempo of the consultations and the communication, but I'd be very surprised if they ceased it altogether or if they did that for an extended period of time. I think, as you noted, President Abbas has called the security cooperation sacred, but I think it also goes to Abbas's basic theory of the approach of achieving Palestinian goals. Mahmoud Abbas has placed a great deal of stock into the relationship with the United States and the hopes, and granted those hopes don't seem to be panning out so well, that the United States is the one that can kind of right the balance or address the massive power asymmetry that exists between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the security cooperation is a key component, perhaps the key component of that relationship with the U.S. right now. It's the one area of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship where there is some measure of respect, at least at the level of the security leaders. There's regular communications. They talk with each other. They do have a basic level of respect for each other. That's something that you just don't see in really any other area of communication between the Israelis and Palestinians. But also, as you noted, this cooperation, given the fact that the occupation continues and intensifies, the settlements continue and expand, this cooperation comes at a great political cost for Mahmoud Abbas.
Akiva Elder, does the fact that Abu Ain was a minister and that this incident was caught on video, does this make this potentially more damaging for Israel?
Yeah, I think that also the timing, Israel is now looking at the early elections that will take place in March, and what the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, needs more than everything is quiet, because his claim to fame is that he's able to manage the conflict without a real attempt to solve it. So the last thing that he needs is that the Israeli will question his ability to manage the relationship with the Palestinian. The Israelis are very happy with this cooperation. And let me just remind you that the Palestinians are not doing this for free. The checks that the American taxpayers and the European, Japanese taxpayers are sending every month to the PA are able to keep the economy running. There are 160,000 people, both in the West Bank and even in Gaza, who can't actually make a living without this cooperation. And the other thing is that it goes both ways. The cooperation with the Israelis is allowing the PA also to contain any kind of an attempt from the Hamas to take over the Palestinian Authority and to bring it down. So I would say that nobody has a real interest to stop this cooperation. Actually, this allows the Israeli government and the Palestinian government to keep playing the status quo and without paying a real price.
Does this relationship, though, Akiva Elder, legitimize what is under international law an illegal occupation in the West Bank? Because that is how many Palestinians feel.
Absolutely. I think that more than that, it allows Israel to keep expanding the illegal settlements. And this place where the minister was killed, is one of those illegal outposts that expanded from 6 to 60 units in no time. And without the military cooperation between Israel and the Palestinians, there wouldn't be the Palestinian Authority, which is the subcontractor of the occupation. But on the other hand, if we will experience more terrorist attacks, buses blowing up, I think that what is left from the Israeli peace camp that would support the left-center bloc in the upcoming elections will just fade away.
Yeah, and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has declared 3 days of mourning, which we're in the middle of now. And of course, we have Friday prayers as well coming up. So, Matthew Duss, it does seem as this is another one of those pivotal moments in Israeli-Palestinian relations. Is this latest crisis, do you think, going to be either halted in its tracks or will we see further escalation of violence?
Well, I certainly hope we won't see further escalation of violence, but as you said, it's very hard to say. I mean, certain acts can precipitate other acts, and as we saw in this summer, it's very easy to see a kind of step-by-step downward spiral into another conflagration. What I think this does definitely is add greater impetus for the Palestinians' international efforts, both at the UN and other multilateral organizations. We know that Secretary of State John Kerry and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be meeting soon in Rome to discuss those UN efforts. There's a Palestinian initiative at the Security Council, also an alternative European draft. And I think it's becoming more difficult for the United States to justify a veto. Though I think given past action, we could expect one. But I think if the wording is changed enough, it could become very difficult for the United States to veto a resolution in the UN Security Council, especially if the Palestinians continue to focus on nonviolent resistance as they have been.
Yeah, just to pick up on Matthew's point there, Akiva Elder, is there a growing sense in Israel that it is becoming harder and harder for the United States to keep defending Israel in these instances?
Yeah, but if you follow, for instance, the statement of probably the Democratic candidate for the next presidential elections, Hillary Clinton, just this weekend, she just said that they're going to support Israel regardless of what kind of government will be there. So the message is that the United States is not going to stick its neck out in order to pursue the peace process. But, maybe this incident is an indication, it should be an indication, a message to the international community that a status quo is probably an option, but a very bad option. That in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's like riding bicycles. If you don't keep pedaling, you will fall down. And since for such a long time, we didn't have even the kind of fake negotiations like we saw for 9 months when Kerry shuttled between Ramallah and Jerusalem, and now there is not any attempt to kind of bringing the sides together to the negotiating table, blah, 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 what we saw for such a long time. I think that this is a message, should be a message, that the United States cannot afford, because Obama is going to have to answer history and explain his Nobel Peace Prize if he doesn't do anything, because it's going to get worse. It's not going, we can't park this conflict. It will reverse if it doesn't go forward.
Matthew Duss, even with all of the anger among many Palestinians right now over this, is it in Mahmoud Abbas's interests? It has to be in his interest, surely, to avoid further clashes in the Palestinian territories.
Yes, I think it clearly is, but I think we need to understand what a tenuous position Mahmoud Abbas is in right now. You have the division between Hamas and Fatah, which is deeply unpopular amongst Palestinians. You have a real lack of faith or lack of hope amongst the Palestinian population. The absence of any political horizon of an end to the occupation. They see Mahmoud Abbas having endorsed nonviolence and endorsed negotiations with the Israelis time and time again, and they see that they've received nothing for that. So he's got to manage a very difficult political situation. But I would like to agree with Akiva what he said about, you cannot park this conflict. I think, as we've seen certainly over the past several months with the Gaza war and now with the death of Minister Abu Ain, this conflict will assert itself despite the best efforts of some politicians to simply manage it. But I would note, even though Hillary Clinton said what she said over the weekend, I think if we look at the statements from U.S. Ambassador to Israel Shapiro, I think he made clear in a speech just several days ago that President Obama continues to be invested in solving this conflict. I think there are several options of what he might do, what he might choose to do to advance negotiations and advance toward a solution. But I think with regard to the UN and other Palestinian efforts, it's also a question of what the U.S. might not do. I don't think we'll see the U.S. Energetically back a resolution at the UN, but I think given things that the President and the Secretary of State have said, I think we would very likely see the U.S. simply not expend a great deal of energy to stop efforts by others, such as the EU, and that could have a significant impact.
And when you say that there isn't much appetite for the U.S. to get more, to push harder for a solution there, Matthew, is that partly because President Obama is in the last 2 years of his administration now, and we also have Israeli elections coming up in March, Netanyahu likely at this point to be re-elected as prime minister? Is the impetus for any sort of meaningful action not there at the moment?
Well, I think the fact that the president is in the last 2 years of his administration actually augurs in favor of greater foreign policy activism. That's traditionally been the way. Given that foreign policy is an area where the executive branch has a great deal of authority and doesn't have to deal so much with Congress, especially now that Congress is fully in the hands of the Republican opposition, we could expect to see more foreign policy activism from the president. But I think the point that you made about the March elections, I think the administration has more or less decided that the Netanyahu government is not a real partner for peace. I think they signaled that in a number of different ways. So I think the outcome of the March elections in Israel, if it could put up a center-left government that's more serious about peace negotiations with the Palestinians, I think that could determine a great deal.
And if we look, Akiva Elder, as far as any efforts such as there are to try to move this process on, much of it depends on the continued building of Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory, because the Palestinians have always maintained that while that is going on, there simply can't be any meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, that's true, but at the end of the day, the question that the Israeli people, the Israeli voters will have to ask themselves is, what is the price that we will pay if we follow the international law and we vote against the settlers and against Netanyahu? And do we have a real alternative? The message has to come, as Matthew said, from the United States and from Europe. And it should be very clear that there are no free meals here, that you can't have it both ways. You can't expect the international community to turn a blind eye because, as President Obama said so many times, as well as Republican presidents, Bush Sr., W. Bush, that it's an American interest. They're not doing us a favor. Stability in the Middle East and putting an end to the conflict is an American interest as well as European interest, and consolidating a coalition now against ISIS and following the Arab Peace Initiative that has been waiting for us for such a long time is part of the American policy. But the problem is, as Matthew just mentioned, is that Obama lost the Congress, and I'm not sure if he's willing to confront AIPAC, the Jewish lobby, if his party will allow him to do this. And I am afraid that he will not be willing to go further than just not using his veto power in the UN. I'm not sure if this is enough to convince the Israeli public opinion. In the American administration, I know that there is even a debate. Some advisors would say that sanctions against Israel will backfire because the Israeli public opinion would say, well, we are not going to allow the international community to dictate to us to interfere in our domestic politics. So it can work both ways.
Yeah, Matthew Duss, you share that view? Is there a likelihood that sanctions in Israel would backfire?
Well, let me just address one point before that. I mean, Akiva raised a very interesting question about whether the president would be willing to take on AIPAC and its allies in Congress. And I think if we look at the example earlier this year of AIPAC's efforts to push further Iran sanctions, I mean, I think that's a great example of when the administration, along with a number of progressive allies in Congress and outside groups, were able to take on AIPAC and win. But that investment, that effort only came because there was an initiative in the offing. There was serious negotiations going on with the Iranians at the time. We don't have anything like that with the Israelis and Palestinians, but I think if the situation were different, if we saw a real potential for breakthrough, then I think you would see a different calculus from the administration, and they might invest in a battle like this in a more serious way. As to the point, I'm sorry, what was the second question?
I just wanted to ask you the potential effects of sanctions inside Israel. Could it possibly backfire?
Yeah, no, I think the point. I think the point is very, very correct to say that you need to be very careful about the way that you would raise the issue of sanctions. I think making clear that the occupation does not come without costs, as Akiva said, I think that's very important. I think the way that the Europeans have gone about talking about, for example, settlement regulations is the right way. It's not to say that we are punishing you necessarily, but that we are enforcing our own laws, and our own laws make it very difficult, if not impossible, to do business with entities that operate in the occupied territories illegally under international law. And I think along with this has to come making very clear that there are off-ramps. Our preference, for example, the preference is to deal with this diplomatically through negotiations and ending in a situation where Israel and Palestine live next to each other in peace and security, greater Israeli acceptance in the region. I think offering those incentives, but they have to be coupled with disincentives. That's the way any negotiation works. So certainly I think some people in Israel, they're already saying this, they will treat any attempts at pressure as unfair, as a double standard, as anti-Jewish, or all the kind of claims that you see. So I think it's a real messaging challenge both for the EU and the United States and others to make clear that we want to deal with this diplomatically, but Israel cannot continue to defy the overwhelming international consensus without costs.
Yeah, and part of the problem, Akiva Eldar, is what was recently done by the Israeli government. Is this the attempt to enshrine in the basic law the idea of Israel as a Jewish state? And aside from the fact that that is alienating so many of the Israeli Palestinians inside Israel, it's not going to do much for the peace process as well with the Palestinians, is it? Because one of their key demands of the Netanyahu government is that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. That's simply a non-starter for Palestinians, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it never came up while in the negotiations with Egypt. It is not, of course, it's not mentioned in the peace accord between Israel and Jordan. I think that Netanyahu brought this up because he knew that it's a non-starter, and because he knew that it sounds good in the ears of the average Israeli, as well as some American Jews, although there was a negative response from organizations such as the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and mainstream Jewish organizations, because it is in clear contradiction with democratic values that Israel wants to take credit for. If you tell 20% of the Israeli citizens that the state does not belong to them because they are not Jewish, including, and there was some protest from the Druze. You know, there is a very small but significant Druze minority in Israel, and they are even serving in the army. And the message to them is that you are not part of Israel. You are okay to pay with your blood, to fight for Israel, to die for Israel, but not to live for Israel. So I think that this is another thing that can backfire on Netanyahu, because one of the issues in the upcoming elections will be on the agenda, will be whether Israel is a real democracy or not. And he will have to answer some questions. And yes, Israel is losing the credit that it is entitled to, the only democracy in the Middle East, if it passes this law.
You share this. You share that view, Matthew Duss. Israel losing its reputation as the quote-unquote only democracy in the Middle East.
I would say that its democracy is in serious danger right now. I think we've seen a number of measures over the past several years under Netanyahu's administration. Challenging boycotts, challenging, loyalty oaths and what have you, that even more moderate members of the right, such as Benny Begin, have criticized. And Benny Begin, for his opposition to some of these laws, was actually voted out of the Likud. This is the son of Menachem Begin. So I think that tells you a lot about the direction of some of these parties like Likud and other parties like Naftali Bennett's and Avigdor Lieberman's. So yes, I think there's a tide of anti-democratic legislation. I think the Jewish state law, as Akiva said, it was quite significant that it earned criticism even from groups like the ADL and others who generally do not criticize Israeli policies in this way. So I think that's an important sign.
Good to get your thoughts on this, gentlemen. Akiva Eldar in Tel Aviv and Matthew Duss in Washington. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And that's it for another edition of Inside Story. And just to let you know, we did have a Palestinian guest booked, Ghassan Khatib, booked on this show, but he pulled out just as we were about to start recording. A reminder, you can find this show and many more on our website. That's aljazeera.com. And you can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can contact us on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.